Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you. In a previous video, I talked about how when we try to fundamentally understand things in the universe, we sort of arrive at this point where concepts break down, and the last concept to go is unity and multiplicity, or sameness and difference, and then after that, we sort of have to just acknowledge that whatever is beyond that is not touchable by the logic. And that's not to say that we're being irrational or giving up on logic, or that and a common mistake is that in sort of spiritual settings is that once anytime some sort of paradox is reached or some sort of mystery is reached, then people will take that opportunity to sort of make logical leaps and sort of pull out of a hat what they want. But the point with the logical chain leading up to the one is that it's sort of it's following you're following the logic the whole way, and then just sort of in a self-referential way realizing the limit of the logic. And I wanted to give it another example of a different type of concept, and maybe some a little bit more organized way of talking about different ways the concepts can break down. So with a sort of classic distinction, which is used in all sorts of philosophy and what have you, and it persists in a lot of the ways we think nowadays. Maybe we don't use these terms as much, but nature and will. So nature being, we tend to think of things that behave by nature, inanimate objects like rocks or something. We think of them as just behaving according to their nature. It's kind of part of the being sort of the definition of what they are. It's what makes them what they are. They have a structure, they have a shape, they have a material, etc., etc. And like lower animals, we might think of, oh well, their behavior is very predictable, so they're just acting according to their nature. Whereas we, the higher animals, we act according to our will. We want to do things, and we choose to do things, and that's what drives our behavior. Uh, um, and so there's kind of two ways we could take these concepts. And to use sort of theological language, you can sort of go the route of fulfilling them, perfecting them, kind of in transcending them, sort of going beyond them. Or when you perfect them, you'll find that they open up to something beyond them. In the way that in the Christian tradition, the idea in theory that Paul has, I guess, is about how to fulfill the law. Once the law is completely fulfilled, then it would go beyond that. Um, and then the other way you can go is sort of the idea of like abolishing idolatry, or like, yeah, so breaking down concepts. You can either fulfill the concepts and perfect them, and then we'll see how they'll break down, or you can sort of do the, why are we using these concepts? Why are they useful? Let's break down the idols that these things that we've been assuming are real. Well, let's logic chop them down until they fall to pieces, and we realize they were nothing. To speak dramatically. So first we'll do the kind of fulfilling and transcending method. So with nature and will, we might think, the perfect nature. Well, so I guess the problem we often find with nature and will as human beings is, for instance, that when they're in conflict. So as a human being, I might want to and will to be able to swing through the trees like a spider monkey. But my nature is that I'm not quite that strong, or I don't have the endurance or the arm length, etc. I'm not as agile, so I can kind of swing around a little bit, but nothing near a spider monkey. I mean, come on. So the so there a couple of things we might think of. When we think of perfecting those things, we think of, like, for instance, well, like God is all powerful, so His will is unconstrained by His nature. Or another way to put it, it would be that His nature and His will, to perfect them is to put them in perfect unison. And if they're in perfect unison, if the nature if the nature is to have a will, an unconstrained will, and the will is, then the will would be kind of choosing the nature, and the nature would be to have a will, so the concept, the distinction breaks down, and there are hadith that sort of indicate this, where like a hadith Qudsi, where Allah is reported to have said that I have ordained upon myself that my mercy will overcome my wrath, for instance. And so again, we have Allah choosing His nature. He's not constrained by something outside of Himself or something that He didn't choose, like a human is, but the concepts, when perfected at the level of the divine, become indistinguishable. So that's the sort of fulfillment method, and then the other method of chopping down the idolatry is sort of thinking like, okay, wait, why are we using these concepts? What do they really mean? What's the real difference between these two concepts? What are they really getting at? Because we might sort of often categories or concepts, we have sort of these vague collections of things that we associate with one word and another group that we associate with the other word, but there's plenty of examples where they might be in the gray zone, and we're kind of like, how do we use these terms? What do they really mean? So it's like we're trying to reduce the concepts, get down to the essences of the concepts, what really makes them different, right? And so in the case of like nature and will, one way to do it would be kind of like, well, okay, nature is, it's okay. It's nature's, things are happening, and they're predictable, right? Or at least the thing we're talking about. So if a rock, many unpredictable events could happen to the rock. The rock could be sitting somewhere, and then the earth cracks open and it falls into lava below, and it melts and is destroyed. Or it could sit there for millions of years and nothing happens to it, and it survives. And we would say, we wouldn't look at it and say, wow, this rock is really fit to its environment or something, or it's like really good at surviving, or it's very clever or anything like that. We would just be like, well, this rock over here sat there for 5 billion years or something and barely changed, or maybe it rolled down a hill one time, and then the other one falls into lava. And so the unpredictability of what happens to the rock is all sort of external to the rock. And then when we look at, so we're trying to put these by, in one way of reducing these terms, these concepts of nature and will, is sort of like trying to put them in terms of each other, trying to, kind of unify what's the one sort of factor that we can pull out, or maybe a couple of factors or something. And then so on the side of will, it would be, well, even if the conditions of this creature or what have you are predictable, its behavior is actually not predictable. So we have will with unpredictability being built into the creature or the thing or whatever it is, as part of it, and then with nature, there could be unpredictable things that happen outside of it, but the thing itself is predictable. And then we ask, okay, well, how do you know if something's inside or outside of something? And you could get into, well, okay, this, because a rock could crack open or break into two, and then it's two rocks, right? So why would we say that these things that happen inside or outside the rock, how do we determine that? And we kind of come to see, well, if a rock consistently, statistically over time or what have you, like all these little pieces of it they maintain the same relative position, then we kind of say they're one rock. Same with anything. It's kind of when we're thinking about how do our brains process something as being one thing or not, it's sort of like, well, do they move together? Do they consistently act in unison in some way? Are they easily separable? Are they practically, and there's all sorts of considerations, but generally it's kind of this question of like how closely correlated they are. And so then it becomes like, okay, well, if things are correlated closely or not, is that what we're getting at? Just like these these concepts, they reduce down into these very vague sort of perspectival things. Because okay, so when we're talking about the what's inside and outside, what's consistently together, then you have to talk about the time scale. To us, the a rock might seem like a pretty stable, oh, that's one thing. But if you look at the whole time scale of a rock being a piece and then breaking apart and then, I don't know, melting and becoming another shape and mixing with other particles, particles going in and out, particles going in, it doesn't, the shape changes, the particles are scattered in a million places. Like, maybe that's less of a one thing. So it becomes very perspectival in the sense of, well, we as creatures of this size in this time scale, with these practical needs and considerations and things that are relevant to us, we judge XYZ things as being internal and external and yada yada yada. Because or another example that I actually was given to Matt Segal of footnotes to Plato mentioned to me in a conversation. He said, from our perspective, us and the sun are two different things. But from an outside perspective, you might say, well, we're a part of the solar system, this one big system. So, like, why wouldn't? And we're pretty heavily correlated to the sun. We're always relatively close to it in galactic terms, etc. So again, these. So then, if the difference between nature and will is just about these kind of like correlations of predictability from our perspective and what's internal and what's external, it gets very relative, and it gets very sort of reduces down to kind of same and difference again. It's all, as in physics terms we say, it's all just information, and so that's very which shows how it becomes very relational. And so and then we kind of, when we think of sameness and difference, we realize, okay, well, sameness and difference needs a sort of third party to judge it. We're trying to really get down to the things themselves, because in order for two things to be said, in order for us to know that two things are the same, we have to interact, or different, we have to interact with both of them, and they're same and different on the terms of our interaction with them. So you can't really say that things are same and different in themselves, right? So the more we try to get in themselves to the essence, the more these concepts continue to break down, and then until you get to a place where, like a nominalist kind of thinking, where the patterns are actually, these categories we're using are not actually real. They're all so relative. Really, the things in themselves, we can't say anything about them. They become these sort of epistemological or logical black holes, which again resemble the one. You can't say anything about it. All the distinctions break down. Everything is just all these concepts sort of rely one upon the, or they're just contrasted one from the other, which is based on our perspective, and things become very muddy and unspeakable, like the one. So, and that's kind of hearkening to the Quranic idea that فَأَيْنَمَا تُوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. So wherever you turn, there's the face of God. We're seeing the attributes of God sort of playing out throughout creation, being reflected in creation. And another verse that sort of speaks to this is what سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق. So we will show, we, God and his angels, will show them our signs in the horizons and in themselves until it becomes apparent to them that it is the truth, presumably the Quran, or some people might say that I think that's the easiest reading, is that that the revelation is true. And so the we're seeing this is one of the ways in which we're seeing the attributes of Allah being reflected in the creation, with the oneness, the oneness of Allah being witnessed either if you fulfill and transcend, or try to think totally about the universe, or try to get down to the essences, the atom, of things in themselves. And yeah, so we'll and that's the logical side of things. But I'll try to, in the next video, I'll try to talk more from a, yeah, like what do we do if logic stops at that point? I mean, we want to, as worshiper, to be in a state of worship. We want to be in awe, in a state of worship of that. But there's other ways to maybe, there's some problems, I suppose, that we can run into before we can reach that state, inshallah. So I'll try to talk about that in the next video.